Everything about Shedeur Sanders screams he's the quarterback. But if people are going to negative in April, they're going to be negative now because they're going to look, oh, where is he ranked?
The drama surrounding Mel Kiper Jr. and the Cleveland media exploded into the spotlight when the narrative around Shedeur Sanders suddenly shifted from honest evaluation to what many saw as outright distortion. Kiper did not come in calm or careful. He came in furious, cutting through the noise with the frustration of someone who had watched truth get buried under convenience. To him, this was not just about football analysis. This was about integrity, about what happens when a young quarterback fights through chaos, performs under pressure, and still gets blamed for failures that were never his. And in Cleveland, the story being told about Shedeur Sanders, according to Kiper, was not just wrong. It was a lie. All season long, the Browns were trapped in confusion, instability, and constant change. 13 quarterbacks passed through the system under Kevin Stefanski, and not one of them became the answer. Not one of them was developed into a long-term solution. That number alone tells a story of dysfunction. But instead of facing that reality, much of the Cleveland media chose an easier target. They chose the young quarterback. They chose Shedeur Sanders. They chose to paint him as unready, inconsistent, or overhyped, while ignoring the condition.
Screams he's the quarterback, but if people are going to negative in April, they're going to be negative now because they're going to look, oh, where is he ranked? Forget that. Look at the
he was forced to survive in. Mel Kiper watched that happen week after week, and eventually, he had enough. To understand why Kiper went off, you have to understand the environment Sanders walked into. This was not a stable system waiting for a young quarterback to grow into it. This was a broken machine, grinding through players without direction. Sanders arrived with talent, confidence, and the tools to succeed, but development requires structure. It requires patience. It requires preparation. Instead, what he got was chaos. No real first-team reps in training camp. No steady rhythm with the starting offense. No time to grow comfortable in the system before being thrown into live fire. Then, suddenly, when the team needed a spark, he was pushed into the starting lineup with almost no preparation. He was expected to lead men he had barely practiced with. He was expected to master a system he had not been allowed to learn properly. And when mistakes happened, the blame fell on him. Not on the process that failed him. Not on the coaching decisions that set him up to struggle. On him. Despite that, Sanders did not fold. He fought. He studied. He adjusted. And when he finally got a real opportunity to show what he could do, he delivered one of the most electric performances of the season. Against Tennessee, with the Browns slipping and momentum fading, Sanders took control. He threw 4 touchdown passes. He brought the team roaring back into a game that looked lost. He showed poise, confidence, and leadership beyond his experience. The stadium felt alive again. The team believed again. That was not the performance of a bust. That was the performance of a quarterback who could become something special. And then, in one of the most baffling decisions of the season, he was pulled when the game was on the line. Instead of trusting the quarterback who had just carried them back from disaster, the offense shifted away from him. The rhythm died. The drive collapsed. The Browns lost a game they should have won. That loss did not belong to Shedeur Sanders. It belonged to the decision that took the ball out of his hands. Yet when the dust settled, the narrative in Cleveland did not focus on that coaching choice. It focused on Sanders. It questioned his readiness. It criticized his development. It ignored the reality that he had been placed in an impossible situation and still found a way to shine. That is what made Mel Kiper furious. He saw a young player being judged without context, blamed without fairness, and criticized for failures that started long before he ever stepped on the field. What made things even darker were the reports that began circulating behind the scenes. Stories of players being sidelined not because they were hurt, but because they questioned decisions. Allegations of injury reports being used as tools of control. Even claims that Sanders himself was listed as injured when he was healthy enough to play. If true, that meant the narrative about his availability and performance was not just misleading. It was manufactured. Kiper saw that pattern and called it out. He said you cannot judge a quarterback honestly if you refuse to tell the whole story. You cannot talk about performance without talking about preparation. You cannot criticize results while ignoring the system that produced them. In his eyes, Cleveland media was protecting the wrong people. They were shielding coaching failures while pointing fingers at the youngest, easiest target. This is why the debate around quarterback development became so intense. In today's NFL, quarterbacks are everything. They are the engine, the face, the future. If you cannot develop one, you cannot compete. And if you go through 13 of them without finding a single long-term answer, something is deeply wrong. That kind of failure does not happen by accident. It happens when leadership is flawed, when systems are broken, and when accountability is avoided. Kiper did not deny that Sanders made mistakes. Every young quarterback does. But he refused to accept the idea that those mistakes defined him. What defined him, in Kiper's eyes, was resilience. Walking into chaos and still fighting. Being thrown into games without preparation and still competing. Bringing a team back from the brink and showing leadership when veterans around him were struggling. That is not failure. That is potential being tested by fire. The larger issue, and the one Kiper could not ignore, was how easily narratives can be shaped. If the media repeats something often enough, it becomes truth in the public mind, even if it is built on half-stories and missing context. When Cleveland media labeled Sanders as disappointing, many fans accepted it without questioning what he had actually been given to work with. Kiper saw that as dangerous, not just for Sanders, but for every young player who might one day walk into a broken system and get blamed for not fixing it alone. This is where accountability truly matters. Coaches are paid to build systems that help players succeed. They are paid to evaluate talent correctly and develop it properly. When they fail at that, the failure should not be hidden behind young players who never had a fair chance. 13 quarterbacks is not coincidence. It is evidence. Evidence that something fundamental was not working. Mel Kiper's outburst was not about drama for attention. It was about protecting the idea that football analysis should be honest. That young players deserve fair evaluation. That context matters. And that blaming the wrong people only guarantees the same failures will happen again. The Shedeur Sanders story is not over. But what has already happened tells us a lot about how narratives are built, how blame is shifted, and how easy it is to rewrite reality if enough voices repeat the same story. Kiper refused to be one of those voices. He chose to say what many were avoiding. That Sanders was not the problem. That the system around him was. And that lying about performance does not fix football. It just hides failure a little longer. Now it's your turn. Do you think Shedeur Sanders was treated unfairly by the Cleveland media? Do you believe coaching and system matter more than